The morning a stranger ruined his shirt on the 7:42 commuter train, Owen realized that the most important things in his life had arrived soaked in inconvenience and smelling faintly of dark roast. Owen Mercer was 38 years old, a furniture restorer who worked out of a converted garage on the south side of the city. He refinished old dressers and sideboards and the occasional dining table that someone's grandmother had left behind. He drove to estate sales on weekends and spent his evenings with wood filler and linseed oil and a radio that only picked up 2 stations. He had been married once, briefly, to a woman named Carla, who had eventually told him that loving him felt like talking to a man reading a map, always technically present, never quite there. He had not disagreed with her. That was 2 years ago. Since then he had been quiet and careful and thoroughly unbothered by the fact that his life had narrowed to something manageable. Manageable was fine. Manageable was what he had. He only took the train that particular Tuesday because his truck was in the shop with a transmission problem that the mechanic described using words Owen recognized but did not understand in combination. He had carried a single black coffee in a paper cup and boarded the 742 into downtown, where he was picking up a set of brass handles from a supplier near the market district. The car was full. He stood near the center doors with his back against the steel pole, facing a window that showed gray February sky, and thought about nothing specific. That was when the woman stepped backward into him. She was carrying her own coffee, a larger cup, and when she turned to find her footing on the lurching car, she caught his arm, and both their cups tilted, and hers went sideways, and approximately half of it landed across the front of his gray button-down. It was not a drip. It was a commitment. She turned completely around, made a sound that was not quite a word, and looked at the spreading brown stain on his chest with the specific expression of someone reviewing their own worst decision. "I'm so sorry," she said. "I'm genuinely, completely sorry. That is an unreasonable amount of coffee for one shirt." Owen looked down at himself. He looked back up. It might be an improvement. She blinked at him once, and then she did something unexpected. She laughed. Not the polite kind, but a real one, the kind that starts somewhere in the chest before the person gives it permission. She pulled a paper napkin from the sleeve of her coat. Apparently, she was the sort of person who kept napkins in her coat sleeve, which Owen found inexplicably reassuring, and pressed it against his sternum. She dabbed at the coffee and looked focused, the way people look when they are treating a minor injury, and very much want not to be thought of as the person who caused it. Her hair was clipped up badly on one side, dark brown with something lighter at the temples. She was wearing a green corduroy jacket over a white shirt, and there was a faint blue mark on the back of her left hand that looked like an ink stain that had survived 2 or 3 rounds of washing. "I don't think that's helping," Owen said. She stopped dabbing. She looked at the napkin, which was now also brown. She held it up between them. "No," she agreed. "It is not." The train swayed. Someone behind them exhaled loudly at the inconvenience of 2 people taking up space while discussing a beverage catastrophe. She folded the useless napkin into quarters, and Owen assumed that was the end of it. Then she tucked it into the breast pocket of his ruined shirt. Her hand was there for a half-second and then gone, and she turned back toward the doors without another word, and Owen stood with a folded napkin in his pocket and half a cup of cold coffee soaking into his ribs. He did not look at the napkin until the train reached his stop. He pulled it out while standing on the platform in the February wind, unfolded it, and found that she had written one word on the inside in blue ink, using what was almost certainly the same pen responsible for the stain on her hand. The word was a name. Below the name was a phone number. Below the phone number, in smaller letters, it said, "For the dry cleaning." Her name was Nora. He stood on the platform for a moment. The train pulled away. A pigeon walked past him with the unreasonable confidence of a bird that had never once second-guessed a decision. Owen folded the napkin back up and put it in his actual pocket, not the breast pocket, the one that closed. He picked up his coffee, which had survived the incident largely intact, and walked toward the market district, and told himself he was not going to think about it. He thought about it the entire morning. He picked up the brass handles. He had a coffee at the counter of a small diner near the supplier's warehouse, the kind of place with mismatched chairs and handwritten menus that listed 7 kinds of eggs and nothing else. He set the napkin on the table beside his mug and looked at it the way a man looks at an unpaid bill, aware it requires attention, not quite ready to give it. The handwriting was hurried, but not careless. The name took up a little more space than the number, as though she had started with confidence and then reconsidered the number of digits required for a phone number, which is 10 and should never surprise anyone. He called her at noon. He was back in his garage by then, standing at his workbench with sawdust on his forearms, and he told himself he was calling about the dry cleaning, which was true in the same way that putting on a good jacket to take out the trash is technically about the trash. She picked up on the 3rd ring. There was noise behind her that sounded like a construction site or possibly a very ambitious kitchen renovation. "This is Nora," she said. "This is the shirt," Owen said. There was a pause. Then, "You actually called. You wrote your number on a napkin." "I write things on napkins when I feel guilty," she said. "I didn't think you'd actually use it. I hadn't decided until about 12:30. She laughed again, the same kind as before, and he heard her move somewhere quieter. The construction noise dropped behind a closing door. "Are you calling about the dry cleaning? Because I really do owe you for the dry cleaning." "I'm calling about the dry cleaning," Owen said, and let that sit there. "Okay," she said. She sounded like she was smiling, or at least making a reasonable impression of it. "Then I'd better buy you coffee, to replace the coffee. Replacement coffee seems like the next logical step." "You're going to spill that one too," he said. "I will absolutely not," she said. "I'm much steadier when I'm not on public transportation." They met 4 days later at a coffee shop 2 blocks from the train station, a small place with low ceilings and paintings on the wall that looked like someone's very promising niece had been given a long afternoon and a reasonable budget. Owen arrived 3 minutes early and sat at a corner table and told himself this was not a significant event. He was buying coffee with a woman who owed him for dry cleaning. He was a person who drank coffee regularly. There was nothing extraordinary about any part of this. Nora arrived with her hair still clipped up on one side, and she was still wearing the green jacket, which Owen decided she probably wore most of the time, and she sat down across from him and put her bag on the floor and said, "You look less ruined." "I got a new shirt," he said. "That's proactive of you." She turned to look at the menu on the chalkboard behind the counter. "They have 12 kinds of oat milk and 1 kind of coffee. This is a very specific establishment. I think the oat milk is the whole point. The coffee is $9, she said, still reading the board. For $9, I want the mug to say something meaningful to me. Mine just says, "Have a day," Owen said. "Not a great day. Just a day. Very non-committal." She turned back and looked at him, and for a second she looked like she was deciding something. "Do you do this a lot?" she said. "The dry, slightly funny thing?" "Not on purpose." "That makes it worse," she said, and she was smiling now, clearly, the kind that she wasn't trying to manage. In a good way. They stayed for 2 hours. She told him she was a structural engineer who had recently moved to the city after a long engagement ended in a way that she described as mutual, and then corrected to mostly mutual, and then corrected again to, he decided that settling down was a metaphor he wasn't ready to make literal, and I decided that was enough information. She said it without self-pity, with the same tone Owen imagined she used when citing load calculations. Accurate, efficient, no editorial commentary. She liked that. He noticed that he liked that. He told her about the furniture. She asked good questions, the kind that came from actual curiosity and not conversational obligation. She wanted to know what he was working on currently, and when he described a mahogany sideboard with a broken leg that had been repaired badly twice before and now needed to be stripped back to the original, she tilted her head and said, "So you fixed the things that other people fixed wrong. Mostly," he said. "That seems like a specific kind of patience." "Or stubbornness," Owen said. "Those might be the same thing," she said. She set her mug down. "I think I came in with the wrong framing on this coffee." "What do you mean?" "I came in thinking I was apologizing for the shirt, but this is actually something else." Owen did not answer right away. Outside, the gray February city moved past the fogged window. A bus stopped. A woman walked by with 2 dogs who had completely different opinions about which direction to go. "What do you think it is?" he said. Nora looked at him steadily. "I think you already know," she said. "I think you're just being careful." He did not argue with that. They exchanged numbers again, this time with actual phones, no napkins involved. She texted him that evening, a photo of her coffee mug from home, a plain white one that said nothing at all. Beneath it she had typed, "Neutral, non-threatening, no promises." He set his phone down on the workbench and looked at the mahogany sideboard in the corner and felt something shift, very slightly, the way old wood settles when it's been returned to the right temperature. She was in the middle of telling him about the worst meeting of her professional career, a site review in which a project manager named Derek had explained load-bearing physics to her, a licensed structural engineer, using an analogy involving Jenga, when a man appeared at the edge of the coffee shop patio where they were sitting on a Saturday morning 3 weeks later. He was in his early 40s, very well dressed in the way that costs money, but pretends not to, and he looked at Nora first and then at Owen with the specific expression of a man who has performed the math and found the result personally offensive. "Nora," the man said. Nora set her mug down. She did not look surprised. She looked tired in a way that had nothing to do with the hour. "Richard," she said. The man, Richard, put his hands in the pockets of his jacket, and stood with the posture of someone who considers their own presence a sufficient announcement. He looked at Owen. "Friend?" he said to Nora, the word doing significantly more work than one syllable should have to. "Yes," Nora said. "A friend I'd like to continue having coffee with." "I just wanted to see how you were," Richard said, still not looking at Owen. "I'm having coffee," Nora said. "I'm good." Richard finally looked directly at Owen. He did it the way some men look at hardware they've decided not to buy, evaluating, slightly dismissive. "Richard Holt," he said, extending a hand. Owen shook it. "Owen Mercer." "Nora and I were engaged," Richard said, which was a sentence no one had asked him for. "I'm aware," Owen said. "Are you?" It was not really a question. "Richard?" Nora said, and there was something quiet and final in her voice, the way a door sounds when someone closes it with intention rather than force. "We're not doing this. I'm just being civil." "Being civil and requiring an audience are two different things," Owen said. He said it evenly, without heat, looking at Richard the way he looked at furniture with concealed damage. Patient, attentive, not particularly worried. "She said she's good. That's the update." Richard's expression shifted in a way that wasn't quite anger but was adjacent to it. He looked at Nora one more time as if waiting for her to qualify something. She picked up her mug and looked back at him and said nothing. He put his hands back in his pockets and left. Nora watched him go. Then she looked at Owen. "You didn't have to do that." "I didn't do anything," Owen said. "I just clarified the social schedule." She was quiet for a moment. "He does that," she said. "Shows up in places. With that face. Like he's waiting for me to explain myself." "Some people think standing somewhere is the same as having a point," Owen said. She looked at him for another beat. "Sometimes careful is just fear with better manners," she said, and Owen recognized that she was not talking about Richard anymore. He recognized she was talking about both of them. They went to a hardware store that afternoon because Owen needed a specific brass polish that the one near his garage had stopped stocking. It was not a planned part of the day, just an extension of it, the kind that happens when neither person has been looking for a reason to leave. Nora walked the aisles with the same attentiveness she brought to everything, picking up items and reading the backs of cans with genuine interest. She found the polish before he did. She held it up like a small victory. He took it from her hand, and their fingers were close together for a moment, and neither of them moved away. "Can I ask you something?" she said, still standing in the hardware aisle with a low yellow light overhead and the smell of turpentine and cedar in the air. "After this afternoon, I feel like I should be nervous," Owen said. "You probably should be." She looked at the shelf beside her, then back at him. "Are you always this careful?" "Depends what I'm trying not to break," he said. She held his gaze. "Well, for the record, I'm not made of glass." He looked at her in the flat, honest light of a hardware store in the middle of a Saturday, with polish in his hand and sawdust probably still on the back of his jacket, and the only thought in his head was that this was the least romantic setting possible and also, somehow, exactly right. He kissed her. It was not a long kiss, not dramatic. It was the kind that happens when two people stop pretending they haven't been thinking about it. She put a hand on the front of his jacket, not pulling him in, just keeping the moment from floating away. When they stepped back, she looked at him with an expression he hadn't seen before on her face, a very specific kind of relief, like a structural calculation that had finally resolved. "You moved first," she said. "You said you weren't made of glass," he said. "I believed you." She smiled. It was the real one, the one that had nothing to do with managing anything. There was one more thing before the afternoon was completely uncomplicated. Owen's phone buzzed as they were walking back to her car, and he saw a message from his older brother, Len, who had apparently run into Richard Holt at some event the previous weekend, and felt it was his responsibility to report that Richard had mentioned running into Nora and that Len thought Owen should know, in the caring and catastrophically unhelpful way that brothers believe constitutes advice. Owen read the message and put his phone back in his pocket. Nora looked at him. "Everything all right?" "My brother thinks he's being useful," Owen said. "What did he say?" "He thinks I should know that Richard mentioned you to him at a party." Owen looked at her. "I thought you should know that I don't care." Nora stopped walking. She looked at him steadily. "That's the most useful thing anyone's said to me in a while," she said. "You can tell Len that," Owen said. "He'll be thrilled to have contributed." She laughed. The afternoon opened up after that, and they walked to the car with their arms close but not touching, and then touching, and the city made its ordinary sounds around them. That was in February. By April, Owen had cleared a second workbench in the garage, and Nora had taken to sitting there on Saturday mornings with her coffee and her project files, and they had developed the specific harmony of two people who have decided to be present in the same space without requiring performance of each other. She brought the white mug, the one that said nothing at all. He made the coffee. There was a succulent on the windowsill that she had brought over one Tuesday without mentioning it, and it was still alive in December, which Owen considered a meaningful metric. He proposed in the garage. He had not planned a location. He had planned the question, and the ring, and roughly what he wanted to say. And then one evening, she was sitting on the cleared workbench, reading something, and the lamp was warm, and the radio was playing quietly, and he just decided that wherever she was the right place. He put the ring on the workbench beside her mug. She looked at it. She looked at him. She picked it up and turned it in the light. "Is this from an estate sale?" she said. "1942, he said. "Art Deco, the stone is original." "You restored it," she said, still looking at it. "Fix the setting," he said. The rest was already right. She put it on. She looked at her hand for a moment, then she looked at him and said, "Yes, just that. Nothing more, because nothing more was necessary." They got married the following September in Owen's backyard, on a Saturday afternoon with string lights in the trees and borrowed chairs and a borrowed dog that belonged to a neighbor and apparently considered himself a guest of honor. Nora wore a dress the color of old linen. Owen wore a jacket that did not have sawdust on it, which required forethought. The ceremony was short. The evening was long in the good way, the kind that doesn't need to hurry because no one wants it to end. On the card table in the corner of the yard, under one of the string lights, there was a small framed piece of paper. It was a napkin, coffee-stained, folded once, her handwriting in blue ink, her name, her number, and below it, "For the dry cleaning." Len spotted it at some point during the evening and came to find Owen near the fire pit. "Is that what I think it is?" he said, gesturing toward the frame. "Probably," Owen said. "She kept it," Len said. "She wrote it," Owen said. "I just finally used it." Len shook his head with the expression of a man who has been waiting 2 years to feel validated by a story. Owen handed him a beer and looked across the yard to where Nora was standing with her sister near the string lights, laughing at something, her hand raised to fix her hair clip that had come loose on one side again. She caught his eye across the yard. She did not change her expression. She just held his gaze for a moment, the way she held structural calculations, steady, certain, load-bearing. He raised his glass very slightly. She turned back to her conversation, smiling. Sometimes the most important door in a life opens because someone wasn't watching where they were going on a Tuesday morning train. Sometimes the thing that changes everything arrives stained and rushed and folded into a pocket and asks nothing more of you than that you don't throw it away. Owen Mercer did not throw it away. He kept the napkin and the number, and eventually the woman who had written both. He fixed old things for a living, and he had learned that the most valuable pieces were never the ones that arrived undamaged. They were the ones that had been broken and badly repaired and broken again and still had the original grain intact. Nora was like that. So was he, probably. They matched in the way that two pieces of old wood match when someone finally sets them flush, imperfect separately and surprisingly solid together. What would you have done if a stranger handed you a napkin with their number on it and walked away without another word? Would you have called? And if you did, what would you have said? And have you ever had something arrive in the most ordinary moment that turned out to change the whole direction of things? Tell me about it in the comments. If this story found you today, leave a like and subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.